Ecclesiastes chapter 4, specifically verse 7. That's where we're going to be starting. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 7. True or false, Solomon has undertaken a major experiment in his life. True. True or false, Solomon has the ability to carry this experiment out. True. Why does he have such an ability? Number one, he was rich. Number two, God had blessed him with unbelievable wisdom. Number three, I knew you weren't listening to number three. Number three, he was living in a time of total peace in the kingdom of God, and therefore he didn't have to worry about wars and those kind of things. So he had time to do some things that maybe someone like a David or a Saul who was fighting the Philistines didn't have. Okay? And his primary objective in this experiment is to what? Yes, find out what the purpose of life is for man. Why am I here? Okay? And he examines life from two different perspectives, doesn't he? He examines life from the perspective of no God, and then he examines life from the perspective of serving a God. And throughout the book, you'll see a mixture of both of those concepts. Okay? And let me ask you this. If Solomon is carrying out such a huge experiment, right? Is he going to learn an unbelievable amount of things during the course of that experiment? Oh yeah. You know, in the book of Ecclesiastes, it's only 12 chapters long. There's no way that he can tell us everything that he has learned. It's an impossibility. Okay? He is telling us the things that the Holy Spirit wants us to learn from that experiment. But there's times when Solomon says something and it lets you know that he's learning a lot of information and trying to get that information to us just as much as he possibly can. Notice how he begins Ecclesiastes 4:7. Then I returned. Then I returned. He had just been talking about a certain kind of individual in the previous two verses. He tells us something he had learned during the course of this experiment. And then he says, then I returned. I went back to my experiment and I learned something else. Okay? And notice how I began point A there. As we read Ecclesiastes, it seems as though Solomon's mind is on fire. Okay? He has learned so much. He has accumulated so much knowledge that he just jumps from one thing to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. Have you ever been in that kind of a situation? So much is going on that your mind is just so filled with stuff that you're just, it's just hard to tell it all. And he wants to tell as much as he possibly can. Thoughts are racing to and fro through his mind. He sees one thing, focuses on it for a minute, then he sees something else and needs to mention it to his readers. Then I returned, he said. He returned to the finding of his experiments. He had focused enough on the sluggard of the previous two verses, and that's where we ended in our discussion last Sunday, talking about that sluggard. Now here's what's interesting. He says, I returned, and I'm looking at my experiment again, and look what I saw. I saw vanity under the sun. Man, has he seen a lot of vanity? Yeah. If all I saw was vanity, I think eventually I'd quit looking. Wouldn't you? If everything's just useless and worthless and empty and vain, why keep looking at it, right? But that's what he says. I saw vanity under the sun. Notice Ecclesiastes 4:8. There is one alone, and there is not a second. Yea, he which hath neither child nor brother, Yet is there no end of all his labor. Neither is his eye satisfied with riches. Neither saith he, for whom do I labor, and bereave my soul of good? This is also vanity. Yea, it is a sore travail. Had Solomon been looking at people who labored in previous verses? Oh yes. And he said what? It's vanity, isn't it? If you just labor and labor and labor and labor and labor, and then all you do is die, then, work is vanity, isn't it? And yet, he contrasted that, and he said, but don't quit working. Don't you dare quit working just because I've told you it's vanity. Don't you dare quit working. Don't you be like that sluggard. Now he turns back to a specific all along. There is. Notice what he said. And there is not what? There's not a second. He doesn't have anybody upon whom he can depend. He is all by himself. Notice how he goes on to explain it. He hath neither child nor what? Nor brother. See, he's trying to emphasize to us that this man is in the world all by himself. Okay? He doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have children. He doesn't have grandchildren. He doesn't have anybody, not even a brother, no siblings, nothing upon which he can depend. He is all by himself. Now, are there some individuals in the world who are like that? Oh, yeah. Probably more than you and I will ever know. Know that? Now, notice what he does. Yet is there no end of all his labor. Here's a man that the only person he has to be concerned with is who? Himself. That's it. That's all he has to be concerned with. And yet what does he do? He just works. And he works. And he works. And he works. Notice what he goes on to say. Neither is his eye satisfied with what? With riches. My brother works at a place called Arda Group. It's in Olive Branch, Mississippi. And it's a real unique place to work. They produce Coke cans and other kinds of cans, empty cans, and those cans are shipped to the Coke company, and they fill those cans up and stuff. But they make a lot of different kinds of cans. And they work 4 days on, 4 days off. Okay? You work 12-hour days. The minute you start working your 9th hour, you're on overtime. The minute you get over 40 hours, you're on overtime. The 4 days that you're off, if you work, you're always on overtime. Okay? You'll get time and a half, double time on your 4th day, double time and a half. Okay? If you don't work those first 3 days they're off and they call you the 4th day, you still get double time and a half. Isn't that pretty good? You know, that's not bad money right there. Well, there are some guys that work in his company and they are single. Okay? Don't have families. They're just single, young guys in their 20s and 30s. And guess what they do? All they do is work. Every day of the week, 7 days a week, 31 days a month if it has 31 days. They never take off. Those guys are making $140,000, $150,000 a year. Single guys just working themselves to death. Sounds like these people, doesn't it? They're all alone. There's no end to their work. And guess what? Neither is his eye satisfied with riches. Man. Even though he comes home to an empty house, he works just as diligently as those who work in order to provide for their families. It just blows your mind. True or false? If you're a single person, it should take you less to live on than if you have a family. It should, right? You know? You got a lot less food. I know Kathleen and I, we use a lot less food than my daughter and my son, who has 2 and 3 kids. Their bill's $200, $300, $400 a week for food. We don't, eat nearly that much food. You got insurance that costs a lot more because you've got a lot more kids. You need a bigger house for a lot more kids, than you might if you're just, a couple. There's a lot of different expenses. So here's a single guy, and all he does is what? Just works himself to death, even though it should take him less to live on. But notice point 3, yet this man keeps working, keeps buying, keeps saving the money he earns from day to day. And he will work probably till he's 65, 70, 75, 85 years old. You know what? He'll just keep working. Now note what the text says. Neither saith he. He never stops and asks this question. For whom do I labor? Now just think about that. He's working himself to death, right? 60, 70, 80 hours, 7 days a week, just working himself to death. For whom do I labor? And bereave, watch this, my soul of what? Of good. He could work less and provide the basics for himself, couldn't he? Yet he works sometimes even more than the person who has others depending on him. If you've got a family, it's not good to work 7 days a week every day of the month. You need some time with who? With your family, don't you? Not this guy. He can just work. Unbelievable. But notice the point 3 under D. There are other things that he could do with his time, but he bereaves his soul of good in order to work and toil and labor. When I first read this verse and got the concept for it, I was reminded of Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. Y'all remember him? Old dude, wasn't he? Sitting in a wheelchair. Grumpy, grouchy, goofy as ever. And just as rich as he could possibly be. That's all he thought about, wasn't it? Just working, making money. And he didn't care about other people, just whatever it takes to make money and make myself rich. And he didn't have a family that we know of. Just a single guy making it through life. I had 2 great uncles who were never married. Uncle Byrne and Uncle Theodore. Well, those are old names, aren't they? Way back down. I'm glad my mama didn't name me Byrne. Okay? I'm glad she didn't name me Theodore. But that was their names. They were never married. They lived together. Never had indoor plumbing. Never. Not even water from a faucet inside. Okay? You stepped out the back porch about 10 feet and you drew your water from a well. Okay? Best water you've ever drank. Okay? But no indoor plumbing. That meant no bathroom. Okay? That was what? That's farther than 10 feet from the house, I'll assure you. That was down the trail a little ways. Okay? They always wore overalls, had chukka boots. Okay? When they crossed their legs, they had white socks on that were rolled down to the top of their chukka boots. Okay? They crossed their leg and you see half their foot, half their leg. Okay? Just as white as it could be. Okay? Always roll their own. You know what I'm talking about, right? See, everybody in here is a little older, so you know what roll your own means, okay? Yeah, they had their little pouch and they had their, their papers, and buddy, they lick them things, and unbelievable. All they did was farm. They never went anywhere. They never did anything. They just farmed. All their life. Work, 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 work. I was closer to Uncle Byrne than I was Uncle Theodore, and he invited me over. He got to take off work that day to take me fishing. Okay? Uncle Theodore, though, out on that tractor, getting with it from start till finish during the day. Okay? They died when they were in their late 80s, early 90s. And they had a boatload of money. Do you know that? Now, they didn't trust banks and stuff. I think they found about $90,000 in the house. Okay? And then they also had a small bank, they had a bank account, just a checking account and a savings account. They didn't invest their money the way many of us do in 401ks and all that kind of stuff. And they still had several thousands of dollars that my grandmother and some of Uncle Theodore's nieces and nephews got. And it just reminds me of what Solomon says. They worked themselves to death, never even had a TV in the house, no running water in the house, no flush toilet in the house. Okay? Thank God they had electricity in the house. And they just worked. And then what did they do? They just died. They worked and they toiled and they labored and they bereaved themselves of what? Of good. Notice what Solomon says about such a life. This is also vanity. Yea, it is a what? Sore travail. It's vanity. It's empty. It's useless. Folks, life is not all about what? Work. Okay? Life is not all about money. Life is not all about riches. There are some other things that are of vital importance in life. And our life should not revolve around work. Okay? But sometimes we have, and apparently even in in Solomon's day, work was a very important thing. Now, remember, Solomon's mind is focused on this person who is a single individual, right? One person. He's alone. There is no second. There is no brothers. There are no children. And he now takes that concept and he says this, that kind of an individual is not in a good position and station in life. Notice what he says. Two are better than what? Than one. Two are better than one. He just talked about that lonely man. And even though they're profitable, even though they have everything they might feel like they need for their lives, he says that's not the best life to live, because two are better than what? Than one. Dutch? Oh yes. Absolutely. The very minute he saw that man, I will make an help meet for him. Okay? Now some people might say, they might argue with God, right? Oh, it's okay to be one. I don't need somebody else in my life. And so Solomon gives 5 examples of what he's talking about to prove his position. Notice what he says. Because they have good reward for their labor. If 2 work together, they'll get more done than if one works all by himself. As I was studying for this particular point, I read about what is known as the 2-horse rule. Okay? The 2-horse rule. Let's assume that I have a horse that will pull 700 pounds. Brett comes along, he's got a horse, it'll pull 800 pounds. Brett and I say, if we put these 2 horses together, they'll be able to pull 1,500 pounds. Can they pull that much? Yeah, they can pull that much. Okay? Because alone, one can pull 7, one can pull 8. Put them together, surely they can pull 1,500 pounds. You want to know what the reality is? They can pull double that when they're together. 2 horses can pull 3,000 pounds. You see, 2 are better than what? Than 1. Unbelievable, is it not? I give an illustration there. Remember when Moses and Joshua were going to fight the very first battle after they came out of Egypt? Is the Amalekites came against them. Moses comes to Joshua and he says, here's what I need you to do. I need you to go get the men. I need you to go get on the battlefield. And I'm going to get up there on that hill. And I'm going to stand up there with my rod. And as long as Moses held that rod high, guess what happened? Israel would win, wouldn't they? Now, folks, I want you to go home today and just practice. Become Moses for a little while. Get your rod. Just go outside in the front yard so everybody can see you. They'll think you're crazy. Okay? But it'll give you some good talking points, right? I'm just trying a Bible example my preacher said to do. Okay? And just go hold your rod up. And just, now you got to take off the rest of the afternoon. Okay? This ain't no 5-minute deal. This is an all-afternoon experiment. Okay? Hold your rod up. Just keep holding it. See how long you hold it. Okay? Just keep holding it. Huh? Yeah, it really wouldn't matter, but yeah, no fishing rod, but, get your rod, hold it up there, and notice what the text says. But Moses' hands were heavy. I found that interesting. His hands were heavy. He may have held it up with one hand. He may have held it up with the other hand. He may have begun to hold it up with both hands, but his hands were heavy. When your hands are heavy, what happens to the rod? It falls. Guess what happens? Amalekites begin to win the battle. But fortunately, he was not all by himself. He had taken 2 men with him, did he not? Who did he take with him? Yes, he took with him Aaron and Hur. They set him down on a rock, and guess what they did? They held his hands up, did they not? 2 are better than 1. Aren't you glad? Well, I know Israel was glad that those 2 men were there. And they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat there on, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Wow, that's good stuff. Now here's something that's interesting. You remember the invitation of Jesus? Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Now listen to him. Take my yoke upon you. Oh, wait a minute. I thought you were going to ease my burden. And now what are you telling me to do? Now you're telling me to put my yoke on you. Here's what's interesting. Prior to our coming to Jesus, we had a yoke on us. And we had burdens on us. And we were pulling those burdens. And those burdens were what? Heavy. Jesus says, here's what I need you to do. You come to me, you take off your yoke, and you put mine on. And guess what it is? It's a double yoke. We are yoked together with whom? We are yoked together with the Master. We have the same amount of burdens, do we not? But now we have 2 people pulling them. 2 are better than what? 1. Remember those horses? Can you imagine? We take the same amount of burden, we give part of that to Jesus, and He helps us carry it. Does that make our burden much lighter? For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And ye shall find rest unto your souls. Wow. What a beautiful text, folks. 2 are better than what? 1, because they have what? Great reward for their labor. Number 2, he says, for if they fall, one will lift up his fellow man. See, this is illustration number 2. They always tell you, if you're going to go backpacking out in the wilderness, and you're carrying a 40, 50, 60-pound pack on your back, don't you ever go alone. Don't ever go alone. It is so easy out there in the wilderness to twist your ankle even with the proper equipment on. It is so easy for you to take a fall and break an arm, break a leg, break a rib. It's just simple to do. One step. Okay? And if you're out there all by yourself, who is there to what? Lift you up. Who's there to help you? And that's what he makes the point right here. Have there been elderly individuals who have fallen in their homes with no one to help them up? It's one of the biggest problems that elderly people have. Did you know that? Sometimes they lay there for an hour, 2 hours, 6 hours. I've known of them lying there a day or two. No food, no water, in pain because something's broken, and nobody can do what? Nobody can help because nobody's there. They're all by themselves, aren't they? Unbelievable. Notice the example there. Folks, it's that concept that caused men to develop a little thing called Life Alert. Know that? Life Alert. Elderly people all by themselves. At least now, when they fall, they have someone to help them. Called who? Called Life Alert. You push the button, and within a few minutes, somebody can be there to assist you. Maybe it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. But let me tell you what, that's better than 2 or 3 days, is it not? Glenn? Oh, yes. It's easy to do, I'm telling you. Very easy to do. But notice what Solomon also goes, he uses the illustration. If one falls, somebody can help him up. Now, he then flips the coin to the single person, right? But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. Folks, you can't argue against that, you know it? 2 are better than 1. They have more reward for their labors, and if one falls, the other can help him up, can he? He gives a third illustration. And if 2 lie together, then they have what? Heat. But how can one be warm alone? Wow. If 2 lie together. Folks, we're talking about body heat, aren't we? So I just looked up a quote about body heat. It says this: heat is continuously generated in the human body by metabolic processes and exchanged with the environment and among internal organs by conduction, convection, evaporation, and radiation. We got a lot of studying to do to understand this. Now you know why I'm not a scientist. Transport of heat by the circulatory system makes heat transfer in the body, or bioheat transfer, a specific branch of this general science. Unbelievable, isn't it? Oh, yes. Absolutely. Everybody remember Apollo 13, the movie? Okay. They had to turn off their computers, didn't they, so they didn't run out of energy? And guys, that little space capsule got cold, didn't it? Okay, and one of the guys that was on the ship, he was getting so cold that he was about to go into hypothermia. And the captain of the ship, Lovell, he runs over to that guy, he wraps him up with his arms and just hugs him as hard as he could and just rubs his back as fast as he can. 2 are better than what? 1. What if Fred House had been there all by himself in that cold? Nobody to warm him. I'll guarantee you, he'd have probably died in that capsule. Again, he notes the lack of warmth by question, but how can one be what? Warm alone. Man. So that's 3 examples he's given, is it not? He's going to give us 2 more examples. And if one prevail against him, 2 shall withstand him. Man. I don't know about you. If I'm out, pitch black at night, 12 o'clock or so. Car drives by and stops. Old boy jumps out. Guess how many I want with me? More than me. You know that? I'll take another carload if I can get it. But I definitely want at least 1 more with me. You know that? Man. 2 against 1 is usually much better than 1 against 1, especially, I put this in there for me, especially if you're small. You know that? You know, you walking along, you're just a little guy, big old dude jumps out of the car. Man, you know, I need a Goliath with me. Guarantee you. I find it interesting that when Jesus sent His disciples out, He never sent them out one by one. He always sent them out in twos. Because two are better than what? Better than one. Me? I don't know. Hey, I'd take it. I wrote down 3 things that were needed by sending these guys out by twos. Number 1, the confirmation of the message. Right? Did they have the written word like we have today? Didn't have the written word. Okay? All they had was what they had witnessed, what they experienced from Jesus, and so they needed 2 individuals to confirm the word. At the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word what? Be established. So you never sent out one, you always sent out 2. That's one reason. Number 2, 2 can protect each other, can they not? Okay, you get out there in the wilderness, you get out there in a city, anything can happen. It's always better to have 2 rather than just the one. And then thirdly, 2 can be of good company to each other, can't they? Yeah, one person can get down, can't he? If you've got another one there, he can encourage you a little bit. Pick you up, keep you going. When he's down, you become the encourager, right? I find it interesting that the Lord established congregations of the Lord's people, did He not? To commune and to congregate in a particular area. Why? So we can encourage one another. That's one of the reasons for the assembly, according to Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. Let us consider one another to provoke unto love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is. Folks, one of the reasons we come together is to encourage each other to what? To be faithful. And if we have troubles, if we have problems, if we're not, where we need to be, we can have somebody pick us up and exhort us, can't we? His 5th illustration. A threefold cord is not what? Is not quickly broken. I've given you a picture there of a threefold cord. Okay? I found it interesting as I was looking at these threefold cords. You've got a 3-fold or a 3-ply and a 2-ply. Okay? A 2-ply cord is just 2 cords and they put them together like this. Okay? And then you put another one on top of that, a 3-fold, and guess what? The dimension, the width of that is not any different, is it? There's only a little bit of difference from top to bottom of the 3. So as far as the weight and as far as the thickness of the cord itself, there's very little difference when you add the 3rd cord. But here's what's interesting. You put the 3rd cord on there and the rope becomes 50% stronger than when it was just 2 cords. Okay? Can that be pretty vital if you're trying to lift somebody? You know? Here's a guy who weighs 300 pounds and you got a 2-ply cord versus a 3. You better know what that cord can do or it can't do. You know that? I want the 3-ply every time. Because it's not going to be what? Quickly broken. Now one of the things I found interesting is this. Marriage is a 3-fold cord. Isn't that something? Marriage is not just the joining of 2 people. It involves a 3rd party. And that 3rd party is who? God. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Matthew 19, verse 6. Marriage is a 3-fold cord. Here's what's interesting. If an individual enters into an adulterous relationship in marriage, is that a 3-fold cord? No. We call it marriage because of the laws of the land, right? But if God does not join that couple together in marriage, even though man may call it a marriage, it doesn't mean that God's involved in it. Okay? Give you an illustration. Today we have in our society homosexual marriage. Right? And we call it that, homosexual marriage. And we have men marrying men, women marrying women. And they call themselves husband and wife, and they got to choose, I guess, which one is who. Okay. But is God involved in those marriages? Did God join those two people together in marriage? No. Okay? God's not involved. Even though we call them marriages, it doesn't make them lawful marriages in the sight of God. Now notice the note that we have down there. Folks, when God is cast from a marriage, that marriage is destined to failure. Do you know that? Because it's what? It's not a threefold cord anymore. It's not strong anymore. It's just two human beings bound together. You put deity in that, that's a strong cord, is it not? It makes it very difficult to break. So he gives 5 illustrations of why 2 are better than 1. Okay? I love the way God argues his cases. You know what? He doesn't just state a fact. He comes right behind it, and he gives us enough examples that when we walk away we say, whew, can't argue with that anymore. Okay? You don't want to argue with God. Questions, comments? Anybody? Nobody? All right, we'll stop right there for today. We're making progress through this book. It's good.